Let me tell you something that a whole lot of people get wrong when it comes to love and relationships. Everybody thinks strength in a relationship means holding everything together, never breaking, never showing emotion, never letting anybody see your soft side. But I'm here to tell you that's not strength, that's distance wearing a disguise. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey, let me take you somewhere real today, because a lot of people are walking around in relationships thinking strength means holding everything in, acting like nothing bothers you, and never showing your emotional side. But I need you to understand something very clearly. What you think is strength might actually be the very thing weakening your connection. Because stronger relationships are not built on silence, they are built on truth, and truth requires vulnerability. Now, when I say vulnerability, I know some of you immediately tense up, because in your mind, vulnerability means exposure. It means risk. It means giving somebody access to parts of you that could be misunderstood or even rejected. So instead of opening up, you shut down. Instead of speaking your feelings, you hide them. Instead of asking for emotional clarity, you stay quiet and hope things fix themselves. But let me tell you something honest, what you don't express does not disappear, it builds up. Every emotion you suppress, every feeling you ignore, every moment you say it's okay when it's not okay, you are stacking emotional weight inside your relationship. And over time, that weight becomes distance. It becomes tension. It becomes confusion between two people who may still love each other, but no longer understand each other. And that's where most relationships don't break suddenly, they break silently. Now let's talk about what vulnerability actually is, because people get it wrong. Vulnerability is not emotional chaos. It's not overreacting to everything. It's not constantly breaking down or oversharing every thought in your mind. Vulnerability is simply honesty without armor. It is the ability to say, this is how I feel, without hiding behind pride, ego, or fear of judgment. It's saying, that hurt me, instead of pretending it didn't. It's saying, I miss you, instead of acting distant to protect your ego. It's saying, I need reassurance, instead of testing someone's love in silence. That is vulnerability. And here's what most people don't realize: vulnerability is not what destroys relationships. Emotional silence is, because when you stop expressing yourself, your partner is left guessing. And guesswork is dangerous in love. People don't always guess correctly. They start filling in gaps with assumptions. Maybe they don't care. Maybe something is wrong. Maybe I'm not enough. And before you know it, misunderstanding becomes distance, and distance becomes disconnection. All because nobody was willing to be real. Now listen carefully, real connection is not created when everything is perfect. Real connection is created when imperfection is shared openly and accepted safely. That means two people being able to say, I'm not okay right now, and still feeling loved in that moment. It means being able to express fear without being judged. It means being able to admit insecurity without being mocked. That is emotional safety. And emotional safety is the foundation of every strong relationship. Because think about it, if you cannot be yourself fully with the person you are with, then who exactly are they in love with? The real you, or the version of you that is always carefully controlled. And let me go deeper. Many people think being strong in a relationship means not needing anyone emotionally. So they build this identity of independence where they never ask for support, never admit emotional needs, never show dependency. But that is not strength, that is isolation. Because real strength is not pretending you don't need anyone. Real strength is being secure enough to say, I trust you enough to let you see my emotions. That takes courage. And when two people both operate from that level of courage, something powerful happens in the relationship. Walls come down. Communication becomes real. Misunderstandings get clear quickly instead of being stored. And love starts feeling alive instead of distant. But when vulnerability is missing, even love starts feeling cold. Because you can sit next to somebody every day and still feel emotionally alone if nothing real is being shared. You can share a bed but not share feelings. You can share time but not share truth. And that kind of relationship looks fine on the outside but feels empty on the inside. Now let me tell you something important. Vulnerability is not just about expressing pain. It is also about allowing yourself to be seen in joy and need and fear and uncertainty. It is allowing your partner to witness the full spectrum of who you are, not just the controlled version. Because when you only show strength, you are not giving them the full picture of you. And love cannot fully connect to what it cannot fully see. And here is the real truth. People don't bond deeply with perfection. They bond deeply with authenticity. When somebody sees your real emotions and chooses to stay, something deep forms between you. Trust. And trust is what makes relationships last when life gets difficult. But if you never show your real self, you are not building trust, you are building distance. So if you want a stronger relationship, stop trying to appear unaffected. Stop trying to protect yourself from emotional exposure. Stop being honest about what you feel in real time. Because timing matters. The longer you delay emotional honesty, the heavier it becomes and the harder it is to explain later. Say it when it happens. Speak it when you feel it. Communicate it before it turns into resentment. Because vulnerability, when done with honesty and respect, does not weaken. Love, it strengthens it. And at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, the strongest relationships are not the ones where people hide the most. They are the ones where people feel safe enough to be seen completely and still choose each other every single day. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey, now I need you to really sit with this next truth, because this is where most relationships either start to heal or start to fall apart. People think love is about finding the right person, but what they don't realize is that love is also about becoming the right kind of person inside the relationship. And one of the most important parts of that is vulnerability. Because vulnerability is not weakness, that is the foundation of trust and deep emotional bonding. Now when I say that, I know some of you immediately feel uncomfortable. Because somewhere along the way, you were taught that being vulnerable means being exposed, being soft, being too emotional, or giving somebody power over you. What do people do? They build emotional armor. They act like they're fine. They avoid deep conversations. They keep everything controlled. They laugh things off. They say I'm good when they are not good at all. But let me tell you something, real armor might protect you from getting hurt, but it also blocks you from being loved deeply. You cannot fully connect with someone while hiding your true self behind walls, because love doesn't grow in secrecy. Love grows in truth, and truth requires vulnerability. Now think about what trust actually is. Trust is not just believing someone won't cheat or leave you. Trust is emotional safety. It is a feeling that you can express your real thoughts, your real feelings, your real fears, and still be accepted. That is where real bonding happens. Not in perfection, but in openness. And when vulnerability is missing, trust becomes fragile. Because when you are not expressing yourself, your partner is left guessing. They start interpreting your silence. They start reading into your distance. They start assuming things that may not even be true. And that is how confusion enters a relationship that could have been strong. All because truth was never spoken out loud. Now let's go deeper. Vulnerability is what allows emotional bonding to form between two people. It is the moment you stop trying to impress and start trying to connect. It is when you say, this is how I really feel, instead of hiding behind pride or fear. And that moment, that honest moment, is what creates real closeness. Because people don't bond with your perfection. They bond with your honesty. Let me break it down even further. When someone sees your vulnerability and responds with understanding instead of judgment, something powerful happens inside you. Your nervous system relaxes. Your emotional guard lowers. You feel safe. And when you feel safe with someone, connection naturally deepens. That is how emotional intimacy is built. But here is the problem. Many people never reach that level because they are afraid of being judged. So they keep everything inside. They only show the parts of themselves that feel acceptable. They hide their insecurities. They hide their fears. They hide their emotional needs. And slowly the relationship becomes more about appearance than connection. And let me tell you something, relationships built on appearance do not last when life gets real. Because real life exposes everything. Stress, pressure, misunderstandings, emotional triggers, they all reveal what was never communicated. And when vulnerability is missing, those moments don't bring people closer, they push them further apart. Now, I want you to understand something important. Vulnerability is not about losing control. It is about choosing honesty over emotional suppression. It is about saying, I trust you enough to let you see me as I am, instead of pretending to be someone you are not. And that level of openness is what creates emotional bonding that cannot be easily broken. Because when someone knows your fears, your insecurities, your emotional patterns, and still chooses to stay connected to you, that creates a deeper level of trust than anything else. But when vulnerability is absent, even love feels distant. Even conversations feel shallow. Even time together feels like something is missing. Because you cannot fully connect to someone who is not fully revealing themselves. And let me say this clearly, emotional. Bonding does not come from time alone. It comes from truth shared over time. You can spend years with someone and still not feel emotionally close if vulnerability is missing. But you can meet someone and feel deeply connected in a short time if both of you are open, honest, and real. That is the power of vulnerability. Now, here's what most people get wrong. They think vulnerability makes them lose power in a relationship. But the truth is, vulnerability is what gives relationships real power. Because when two people trust each other emotionally, they stop operating from fear. They stop playing games. They stop guessing. They stop protecting themselves from each other, and instead they start building with each other. That is where real bonding happens. Because emotional connection is not built in perfection, it is built in truth shared without fear. And the more you practice vulnerability in a healthy way, the stronger your relationships become. Because you are no longer hiding behind masks, you are showing up as yourself. And when two people show up as their real selves, there is nothing fake holding them together, only truth, understanding, and emotional safety. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where love becomes real, not when everything is perfect, but when both people feel safe enough to be fully honest and still choose each other anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey. Now let me take you deeper into something most people in relationships don't fully understand until they've already lost connection, lost communication, or lost emotional closeness. Everybody wants a strong relationship. Everybody wants loyalty. Everybody wants love that feels real, stable, and unshakable. But very few people are willing to do the emotional work that actually creates it. And one of the biggest missing pieces in modern relationships is vulnerability. Because when people stop being open with their emotions, they don't protect love, they slowly disconnect from it. Now listen, to me carefully, when people hide their true feelings, they create distance even in close relationships. And that distance is not always physical. In fact, most of the time it's emotional. Two people can be sitting in the same room, sharing the same bed, living in the same house, but emotionally they feel like strangers. Not because they stopped loving each other, but because they stopped revealing themselves to each other. And that's where the breakdown begins, because love does not die. Suddenly, it fades in silence. It fades in unspoken words. It fades in the emotions that were never expressed and the conversations that were never had. Now let's be honest about something. People don't usually wake up one day and decide to become distant. It happens slowly. One moment they feel something but don't say it. Next time they feel something again but still stay quiet. Then another moment happens, and instead of expressing it, they convince themselves it's not important. Or they say, I don't want to start an argument. Or it's not worth mentioning. But over time, those small moments of silence turn into emotional walls. And those walls become the distance people later complain about. Now here's what I want you to understand. Emotional honesty is not just about big conversations. It is about consistent expression of how you feel in real time. It is about not storing emotional experiences like they don't matter. Because everything you don't say does not disappear, it accumulates. And when emotions accumulate without expression, they turn into frustration, confusion, and eventually disconnection. Now let's talk deeper. When vulnerability is missing, assumptions take over. And assumptions are dangerous in relationships. Because when you don't explain your feelings, your partner starts guessing them. And most of the time they guess wrong. They interpret your silence in ways that were never true. They assume distance means disinterest. They assume quietness means anger. They assume space means loss of love. And suddenly, a misunderstanding grows between two people who never actually stopped loving each other, all because emotions were never openly shared. Now I want you to see this clearly. Vulnerability is what keeps emotional clarity alive in a relationship. When you are honest about your feelings, you remove confusion. When you communicate your emotions, you remove guessing. When you express your needs, you remove misunderstanding. And when misunderstanding is removed, connection has space to grow. But when everything is hidden, even love becomes unclear. Now let me take it further. People often think hiding emotions keeps peace in a relationship. But what it actually does is delay conflict, because unspoken emotions don't stay silent forever. They come out later in different forms. Sometimes it's irritation. Sometimes it's emotional withdrawal. Sometimes it's sudden arguments that seem to come out of nowhere, but they didn't come out of nowhere. They were built over time. And that is why vulnerability is so important, because it prevents emotional buildup. It keeps things clean. It keeps communication alive. It keeps both people aware of what is actually happening emotionally in the relationship. Now, let me be very clear. Strong relationships are not relationships where nothing is said. Strong relationships are where everything important can be said safely. That is the difference. Because when people feel safe to express themselves, they don't have to hide. And when they don't have to hide, they don't disconnect. They stay emotionally present. They stay engaged. They stay connected in truth instead of assumptions. And here's something else you need to understand. Emotional distance does not always mean love is gone. Sometimes it simply means communication has stopped. It means emotions are no longer being shared. It means vulnerability has been replaced by silence, and silence over time creates separation. Now, I want you to imagine something real. Two people in a relationship. One person feels hurt but doesn't say anything. They think they are keeping peace, but inside they are changing emotionally. They become quieter. they become less expressive. They start withdrawing without explaining why. The other person notices the change but doesn't understand it. So they start reacting to confusion. Maybe they become distant too. Maybe they become defensive. Maybe they start overthinking. And now both. People are emotionally reacting to silence instead of truth. And that is how relationships slowly lose connection. Not because of one big mistake, but because of repeated emotional silence. Now let me bring you back to the core truth. When people hide their true feelings, they create emotional distance even in love. And that distance is what eventually weakens trust, weakens understanding, and weakens connection. Because trust is not just built on loyalty, it is built on emotional transparency. And transparency requires vulnerability. So if you want to protect your relationship, don't just focus on being together, focus on being open. Don't just focus on staying, focus on expressing. Don't just focus on love being present, focus on making love understandable between both people. Because at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, relationships don't break because people stop loving each other. They break because people stop talking to each other in truth and start living in emotional silence. Instead, ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey. Now let me take you into the final layer of this truth, because if you don't understand this part, you will keep repeating the same emotional mistakes in your relationships and wondering why things don't feel as deep, as connected, or as stable as you want them to be. The strongest relationships are not built when two people never struggle. They are built when two people feel safe enough to be fully seen, fully known, and still fully accepted. And that only happens when both people reach a place where real connection becomes more important than emotional protection. Now I want you to understand something very clearly. Real connection happens when both partners feel safe enough to be fully seen and accepted. Let's slow that down, because that's where most relationships either grow or collapse. Everybody wants to be loved, but very few people feel safe enough to be fully seen. And there is a difference between being loved and being understood. You can be loved from a distance, but you cannot be deeply connected without being understood. And understanding requires visibility. It requires honesty. It requires emotional access. But many people never allow that access. They keep parts of themselves hidden. They only show what feels acceptable. They only express what feels safe. They only reveal the version of themselves that they believe won't be rejected. So what happens? The relationship becomes surface level. It looks fine, it functions, but it never reaches emotional depth. And without depth, connection stays weak. Now let me tell you something important. When people don't feel safe enough to be fully seen, they start managing their emotions instead of sharing them. They start filtering their truth. They start editing their feelings. They start deciding what is okay to say and what is too much. But love cannot grow in edited truth, because edited truth is not real connection. That is controlled communication. And controlled communication always creates distance, even when people are physically close. Now here's the real issue. Many people think acceptance is automatic in relationships. They think if they love me, they should just understand me without me explaining everything. But that is not how emotional connection works. People cannot understand what is never revealed to them. You cannot expect someone to accept the parts of you that you refuse to show. And that is where vulnerability becomes powerful, because vulnerability is what allows you to be seen fully instead of partially. It is what allows your partner to understand your emotional world instead of guessing it. And when someone understands your emotional world, connection becomes deeper, stronger, and more stable. But when you hide your emotional world, you create confusion instead of connection. Now let's go deeper. Real connection is not created by perfection. It is created by emotional exposure followed by acceptance. That means you show who you really are, and the other person responds with understanding instead of judgment. That moment creates trust, and trust is what makes love feel safe. Because without safety, love becomes stressful. And let me say this clearly. Many relationships are not failing because love is missing. They are struggling because emotional safety is missing. One or both people do not feel safe enough to express themselves freely. So they hold back. They stay guarded. They avoid certain conversations. And over time, emotional distance grows quietly between them. Now, here is what most people don't realize. Feeling accepted is not about someone agreeing with everything you say. It is about feeling safe enough to express yourself without fear of rejection or punishment. That is acceptance. That is emotional safety. And when that safety exists, people naturally become more open. They become more honest. They become more emotionally available. And that is when connection becomes real. But when that safety is missing, people start protecting themselves instead of connecting. They start guarding their emotions. They start choosing silence over honesty. And slowly they stop being fully present in the relationship. Now I want you to picture something, two people sitting together, but one person is emotionally holding back because they don't feel fully accepted. The other person is wondering why the connection feels different, why the energy feels off, why things don't feel as close anymore. And the answer is simple: the emotional truth was never fully shared, because connection cannot survive where emotional expression is restricted. Now let me take it further. When both partners feel safe enough to be fully seen, something powerful happens. They stop performing in the relationship. They stop pretending. They stop hiding emotions. They start communicating in truth instead of fear. And that creates emotional alignment. And emotional alignment is what makes relationships feel strong, because when two people are emotionally aligned, they understand each other faster. They recover from conflict quicker. They trust each other deeper. And they don't waste energy trying to decode each other's behavior. Now, let me be honest with you. Real connection is not effortless, but it is simple. It requires two things: honesty and acceptance. One person speaks truth, and the other person creates space for that truth. That exchange builds emotional security over time. And when emotional security is strong, love becomes stable. But when emotional security is weak, even love feels uncertain. Now here's the final truth you need to understand if you want a strong relationship. You cannot only focus on how much you love someone, you also have to focus on how safe they feel being loved by you and how safe you feel being loved by them. Because love without safety becomes fear, and fear destroys connection. But love with safety becomes trust, and trust builds lifelong connection. And at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, the strongest relationships are not the ones where everything is perfect. They are the ones where both people feel fully seen, fully accepted, and still choose to stay emotionally open with each other every single day.